On behalf of all my colleagues back at the Central Intelligence Agency, I want to welcome you to today's event entitled The President's Daily Brief, Delivering Intelligence to Presidents Nixon and Ford. My name is Joe Lambert, and I'm the Director of Information Management at CIA, and I'll be your MC for today's event. Events like this take a lot of work, and I want to take a second to acknowledge the efforts of the CIA officers back in ADO-IMS who reviewed and declassified these 28,000 pages over the last year. They were assisted by a number of intelligence community agencies, but the work of one in particular deserves special thanks, and that's the work of the National Security Agency. Today's event marks the CIA's 25th major declassification and release event since 2007, and our second PDB release event, the first being last September at the Johnson Presidential Library. We're very fortunate once again to have two people with us who probably know more about the President's Daily Brief, delivering it and receiving it, than anybody else that I can think of, and that's the Director of the CIA, John Brennan, and the Director of National Intelligence, Jim Clapper. Both have been very supportive of intelligence transparency efforts. Director Clapper has instituted an Intelligence Transparency Council, and today's event fits very nicely in with the goals of that council. And events like today would absolutely not happen without the support of Director Brennan. For those in attendance today, you should have a document like this on your chair with an agenda. The introductions will be very brief today because the agenda has all of the bios in it. For those of you that are watching at home, you can see that same booklet and all the documents on the CIA.gov website. I want to take a moment and thank the Nixon Foundation, the Nixon Library, for making this wonderful venue available to showcase the declassification and release of these CIA documents. Next, I'd like to introduce Mike Elizey, the Director of the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum, to offer some welcoming remarks. Mike?
Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Archivist of the United States, David S. Ferriero, and the Richard Nixon Foundation, good afternoon, and welcome to the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum here in Yorba Linda, California. Before we get started, I'd like to personally welcome Archivist Ferriero, who has joined us today. And on behalf of the National Archives and the Nixon Foundation, allow me to extend a warm welcome to Directors Clapper and Brennan. I'd also like to welcome Bill Barabalt, President and CEO of the Nixon Foundation, Board Member Larry Higbee, elected representatives from host city Yorba Linda, including Gene Hernandez, and from around the region, and esteemed panelists, guests, and members of our community. Members of our community soon to be informed on the value and the place in history the President's Daily Brief has on the relationship between the intelligence community and the Commander-in-Chief, and the importance of this daily briefing process to the security of our nation. I'd also like to recognize Stacy Davis, who's representing the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library and institutional partner in today's release. My name is Mike Elizey. I'm the Federal Director of the Nixon Library, and I'm privileged to represent one of 13 presidential libraries, soon to be 14, administered by the National Archives and Records Administration. Presidential libraries and museums, presently from Hoover through Bush 43, promote an understanding of the presidency and the American experience. We preserve and provide access to historical materials, support research, and create interactive programs and exhibits that educate and inspire. Today's program is a perfect example of the Presidential Library System fulfilling its mission. Similarly, in an overriding and overwhelming parallel, the mission of the National Archives and Records Administration is to drive openness, cultivate public participation, and strengthen our nation's democracy through public access to high-value government records. How are we doing on that one? Today's conference, the President's Daily Brief, Delivering Intelligence to Nixon and Ford, addresses that mission directly and represents clearly the interrelationship between the intelligence community and the National Archives. When the time is right, the shared mission is openness and transparency of America's records. Today, the time is right. Finally, because we've gathered at the Nixon Library, I'd like to offer a brief note about today's program and President Nixon. As you'll note from the conference materials, author John Helgerson tells the story of a sometimes difficult relationship between Richard Nixon and the intelligence community. Nixon's exposure to the U.S. intelligence community heightened during his 8 years as Dwight Eisenhower's vice president in the 1950s. Nixon's familiarity with the intelligence briefing program served candidate, nominee, and President-elect Nixon very well nearly a decade later in 1968. It formed the basis for an active role for his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, and contributed mightily to the tools Richard Nixon aggregated in becoming arguably the most well-prepared president to assume the nation's highest office. Stay tuned, we're going to learn so much more about the important relationship between the intelligence community and Presidents Ford and Nixon throughout the day. So again, welcome to the Nixon Library and to today's program, and I'm going to turn it back over to Joe Lambert. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Let's get right to the program. I'd like to invite Director Brennan up to the stage, please.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be here in Yorba Linda joining you this afternoon, and it's an honor to be part of what I know will be a fascinating and an enlightening event for all of us. And thank you, Joe, for all of your hard work on this project. This is the culmination of many, many, many months of effort by you and your team, so thank you so much. And thank you, Mike Elizey, for your terrific work and for opening the doors to us today so that we can have the fitting venue for the release of these PDBs. Also, in the grand tradition of our political predecessors, it is always a pleasure to escape Washington, D.C. in the month of August. Maybe more this year than previous years. But I would normally say that it feels great to be out of Washington, but when I look around here, I see that we are all in the East Room, and so it's a bit surreal. Remarkable, remarkable library, and we had a tour earlier on, and I'm really looking forward to the opening of the library, reopening on October the 14th. Now, as I have often said, being CI director is the absolute greatest job in the world, and I mean that. And one of the most rewarding elements of my tenure as director has been the chance to get out across the country to give our fellow citizens a fuller understanding of the tremendous work performed by the women and men of CIA, indeed the women and men from throughout the intelligence community. Today is one such opportunity, an opportunity to shed light on our mission and our history for the benefit of the American people. Naturally, this is not often as easy I would hope it would be. By definition, the world of intelligence, the business of CIA, requires a sufficient degree of secrecy to protect our officers, our sources, our methods, and our nation. But we all know that the American people demand more of their intelligence services and certainly deserve better than secrecy for secrecy's sake. The unique authorities that have been granted to us through the representatives in Congress are a sacred trust, one that we must earn, in part, by being as forthcoming as we possibly can. And today's occasion is one way in which we seek to earn that trust. For when we can be open about what we do, when doing so does not hinder our current operations or hurt our national security, we are happy to contribute to the historical record. The President's Daily Brief, the PDB, represents the best picture of the world that CIA and now the intelligence community can furnish to the President. It is the premier intelligence product, the culmination of painstaking effort each day so that our nation's leaders have what they need to chart a safe and successful course for our country. It is also one of the most sensitive and tightly held documents that the U.S. intelligence community produces. Tailored for the President, the PDB provides an unvarnished and often difficult truth about an ever-changing and very complex world. And so the release of these historical PDBs reveal a crucial and until now a missing dimension of the historical narrative. Most importantly, they give us a better understanding of the international challenges facing both Presidents Nixon and Ford. Last year, I had the honor of speaking in Austin, Texas, at the first substantial release of PDBs, those from the Kennedy and Johnson administrations. That collection contains some 2,500 documents and over 19,000 pages. Today's release is no less extensive. a fact that I'm sure will delight those PhD students out there looking for a dissertation topic. All counted, it tips the scales at about 2,500 documents and 28,000 pages. But far more important than their sheer bulk, these PDBs provide us with an invaluable survey of the world as it was presented to our nation's leaders at the time. By reading through this release, you can envision yourself in the Oval Office confronting these complex and demanding challenges. You can trace the evolution of détente, the thaw in Cold War tensions with the Soviet Union that paved the way for formal agreements on nuclear and biological proliferation. You can follow the deteriorating course of the Vietnam War to the point, as the PDB put it, on 30 April 1975, when the flag of the Viet Cong's Provisional Revolutionary Government was hoisted over the presidential palace, marking the end of 30 years of war in Vietnam. There is also detailed coverage of the coup against President Allende in Chile, the post-colonial conflicts in countries such as Angola, the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, and the emergence of modern international terrorism, with which we are all now all too familiar. All that barely scratches the surface of what this collection entails. But by thumbing, or perhaps scrolling, through these PDBs, we are reminded that the daily realities facing our presidents and policymakers have always been more difficult than hindsight lets on. And as these documents further illuminate a wide swath of international history, they also offer a window on how CIA provided intelligence support to the Oval Office. It was during the Nixon and Ford administrations that the PDB continued to grow in sophistication. Truly an all-source product, the PDB synthesized intelligence from clandestine reporting, overhead imagery, intercepted communications, and open sources. And as it is today, publishing the PDB was truly a 24/7 process. Perhaps foreshadowing the greater role the intelligence community would play in the process, the PDB under President Nixon would often feature national intelligence estimates, those analytic products that represented not only the views of CIA, but of the entire intelligence community. Then, as now, intelligence support to the White House was a collective effort. Despite the historical value of these PDBs, the documentary record only goes so far. All too often, there are key memories and anecdotes that do not quite make it to the written page. And that is one of the many reasons why we are so fortunate today to be joined by our Director of National Intelligence and my close friend and good colleague, Jim Clapper. I'm certain that there is no one more qualified or well-versed than Jim to speak about the evolution of the PDB and intelligence support to the President. Jim has had a long and distinguished career as an intelligence officer, a career that extends even further back than the period covered in today's PDB release. For instance, in the 1960s, Jim was a briefer for General Westmoreland in Vietnam. I must tell you that some reports indicate that Jim was General Patton's aide-de-camp in World War II, as well as a classmate of John J. Pershing. But those reports remain uncorroborated, at least until now. Under Jim's outstanding leadership as the Director of National Intelligence, the PDB has truly become a product of the intelligence community, marshaling the full extent of its tremendous knowledge and expertise. And I have seen firsthand that Jim is an officer who walks the talk when it comes to fostering the appropriate level of openness about our intelligence activities. A Marine, a career Air Force officer who rose to the rank of Lieutenant General, Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Imagery and Mapping Agency, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, and now our greatly respected and much beloved Director of National Intelligence, Jim Clapper, has agreed to join us today for a discussion about the PDBs. And with that, Jim, I would ask you to join me on the stage so we can talk a bit of shop. Well, hello? Hello, good. Okay, well, Jim, thanks so much again for joining us today here. As I said, you are better postured than anybody else, I think, to talk about how the PDB has changed since the early years. And we will talk about the PDBs during the Nixon and Ford administrations, but I thought it might be worthwhile for you to just spend a few moments to just reflect upon how the product has changed. Back then, there was a hard copy that was delivered to the President and the process in terms of support for that products has changed. But I want to get your perspective, since you are now the one who goes into the Oval Office on a regular basis to meet with the President and to talk about the PDB. If you believe that the PDB is still as influential, if not more influential, in terms of the President's thinking on these global issues.
Well, thanks, John, and thanks for the honor of being on stage with you for the second time since I was invited to participate as well in the rollout at the Johnson Library. And so it's a real honor to be with my close friend and great professional colleague, John Brennan, who I believe is going to go down as one of a handful, and don't use all your fingers, of the most outstanding directors of CIA in its history. Personal note on these two events, the one today and the previous one, actually bookended my two tours in Southeast Asia. I went to Vietnam in 1965 and 66, and again for a second tour in 70 and 71, flying reconnaissance missions, signals intelligence reconnaissance missions over Laos and Cambodia. So in both occasions, I didn't know there was a PDB. And in reading through the contemporary PDBs, I understood what a very small cog I was in a very, very large war effort. During the course of the tour today of what the Nixon Library will be after it's been renovated, it's going to be spectacular, I think. And like John, I think both whetted our curiosity to come back here when it's open. And had a bar graph, line graph on the number of troops deployed in Southeast Asia, and that was a reminder. In 1971, happened to have 344,600 people in Southeast Asia, and I was one of those. That's just put in perspective where I fit in the larger scheme of things. As to the question of how the PDB has changed, I think the major change, of course, as John mentioned, is that instead of it being exclusively a CIA product, which of course it was during the period in question here, it now represents the inputs, the views and assessments of the entirety of the U.S. intelligence community. Now, to be clear, CIA is still the engine for the PDB, but in all cases, it is always, regardless of who drafts it, whether it's CIA or any other component of the intelligence community, it is always coordinated throughout the intelligence community. And importantly, where appropriate and where someone wants to, dissents are reflected. Now, obviously, you won't find dissents in the PDBs that were rolled out in September at the University of Texas, nor those here, because it was done by one agency and dissents weren't reflected. I think that's a strength, frankly, to register dissent, and certainly President Obama has on more than one occasion said to us that he welcomes that and would be surprised that there weren't dissent within the intelligence community, so we reflect that. And of course, the other changes are, I think, more occasioned by the technology. I think I may be a little biased, but I think our PDBs today are richer because of the many more sources of information that we draw on and the timeliness of the availability of those sources of information, which weren't available just because of the technology then available in the PDBs that will be rolled out today. We have gone to an iPad. President Obama, who's very IT smart, we went to this a couple years ago. That was a hard transition for some people, not for him, but for others. Who didn't want to give up their precious hard copy, and now iPads have become the standard. They are dumb iPads, I should say. We had to pay money to dumb them down because they can't be interactive or wireless, of course. And someday we'll figure out how to do that. But it does allow for much more agility, I guess I'd say, in the presentation of material to include graphics, videos, and references to previous articles, which can be done at the, at the pointing of the finger. So I think from the standpoint of the sources of the PDB, the technology that is involved in producing it, the fact that it is more broad gauged in representing the views and inputs and capabilities of the entirety of the intelligence community, and that on occasion it does reflect dissent, are, I think, the major changes.
Throughout the course of the two administrations, Vietnam was mentioned in more than 2/3 of the PDB documents that were being released today. Today's event is about history, and General Westmoreland was certainly a historical figure. You had the opportunity to bring him intelligence about the war, and maybe we can take advantage of this opportunity to hear your views about what it was like to brief General Westmoreland, how he received the information, and your techniques in briefing him.
I'd been in the Air Force about 2.5 years when I went to Vietnam. I was in the first 100 Air Force intelligence officers that were sent on what was called a PCS, or permanent change of station basis. Up until that point, up until late 1965, all U.S. forces that were deployed over there were on a temporary duty basis, meaning 90 or 120 days. So I was among the first to go for a year. I've been there about 3 or 4 months and was sort of plucked out of the sea of an anonymous lieutenants and said, I was told next Saturday you're going to go down to MACV headquarters, Military Assistance Command Vietnam, and help and be part of a briefing team for General Westmoreland, who is the commander of U.S. The Military Assistance Command Vietnam, as it was called. I'd never even seen a 4-star general in my life, let alone talked to one. So this is a very daunting experience. And I was very nervous the first time I did it. My specific briefing topic was to gather up and correlate and synthesize any signal intelligence reflections of airstrikes over North Vietnam. And so I put together a map board and had sort of what we call icon boxes. And I took my briefing boards down every Saturday to brief him. To be quite honest, I'm not sure what he made of it. He was always seemed very interested, asked questions about the significance or reflections of a particular intercept, which I struggled to answer. I did wonder sometimes about, he had a great affinity for statistics and numbers, and I did wonder sometimes whether we maybe bored into the weeds an awful lot at the expense of what I came to regard as the bigger picture, which, to be candid, reflected my own growing disillusionment with the war during my year there in 1965 and 66. So it was an interesting experience, learned some things about how to try to present things to senior people, which I trust helped me later on. It was a humbling experience too, because I think I also appreciated that command can be a very lonely thing, and particularly when you're responsible for the lives of soldiers, and we're watching a lot of them being killed and wounded. And that had a very, I could tell, a wearing effect on General Westmoreland.
Speaking about the weeds and the big picture, the PDBs being released today really chronicle the course of that war. And there were daily developments, and so a lot of the PDB pieces were really focusing on a lot of the tactical developments on the ground. How do you see the balance between that tactical and strategic picture being manifest in the PDB and the PDB process, and how do you do that today in terms of making sure that as we look at the situation in Syria and Iraq and other places, that we don't just focus on the tactical developments, but we have a broader perspective in terms of the overall trends and developments?
Well, John, you've put your finger on one of the challenges that the current generation of people who put together the PDB have, as well as the earlier generations have. You know, how do you balance the high level of generality that you have to keep in perspective and at the same time present enough detail that the reader, in this case policymaker number one, currently is getting enough of the flavor and the nuance and the subtleties and the atmospherics that prevail in whatever given situation you're trying to describe. And that is something we constantly wrestle with yet today, to try to strike that balance. I did, it was very interesting to me to go back, and I did read through a lot of the PDBs that are being rolled out during the period of my second tour, from June of 1970 to June of 1971, and just to see what was presented to the president at the time versus what I saw in my way down in the engine room. And I actually thought that the PDB articles were a pretty good chronicle of what I recall from my vantage on the ground when I was in Vietnam at the same time. And as well, because of the global perspective, the global responsibilities the U.S. president has, Vietnam, while it dominated as a topic, those PDBs, there were many other issues that the president had to deal with as well, which the PDB had to treat. So, of course, the Cold War, access to Berlin, the ever-present Mideast. There's haunting similarity, I found, between the situation in the Mideast then versus now. Many of the same concerns and conditions. So I think that, and we always have that challenge of how to balance the detail and the broad picture. We spend a lot of time agonizing over what topics to pick, and labor over every word in the interest of doing the best we can to be as objective and responsible, but at the same time be mindful of the president's time. This president devotes a lot of time to intelligence, but he has a whole lot of other issues, as you all can appreciate, on his platter, and we have to be mindful of that, that we not inundate him with too much intelligence, which is possible. So it is, in the end, for us today, as it was historically, a balancing act.
It also should be noted that the PDB is not the only access that the intelligence community has to the president. We spend a lot of quality time in the White House Situation Room at National Security Council meetings, where you can take that step back and look at things strategically.
John's exactly right, and John and I spent a lot of time bonding in the White House Situation Room. I think that's, though, a reflection of the fact that in the national security apparatus, intelligence drives everything. John and I don't get a pass when we go to these meetings. We always have to present the intelligence picture. They all start with that, and that kind of drives the agenda for the meetings. The specific forum that the president's involved in, of course, are National Security Council meetings, and again, very much driven by intelligence. And so there'll be intelligence material that the president will read, and he is, I think our observation has been in our time, the president's always eminently prepared. He has always done his homework before these meetings. As well, the president ingests the iPad on the PDB with, he reads that, so we don't actually brief the PDB per se. We do have oval meetings, though, where we will brief other items, either that supplement or augment or update what is in the PDB, or on other issues that we think he should be familiar with. And CIA very much a part of that process as well.
The PDB frequently will bring to the president news that is not always that pleasing in terms of policy course and options and challenges. I was struck by looking at some of the PDBs in the early days of President Nixon's administration. It was a week, less than a month after President Nixon assumed office. This was on February 14th of 1969. The PDB says there are only a handful of politicians in South Vietnam with whom even a significant fraction of the people identify, and the government is unlikely to acquire a broader political base merely by bringing some new faces into the cabinet. Now here's President Nixon, who has inherited the legacy of the Vietnam War, and he needs to deal with this issue in terms of we are supporting the South Vietnamese government, and here's intelligence bringing that news to him. You've had occasion in the past, as have I, to bring information to the president that really challenges, I guess, policy options and courses.
Yes. First of all, the quote that you read from the PDB way back then was exactly accurate. And that was one of the great personal disillusionments I had when I got to Vietnam and found out that what the United States was essentially propping up were a series of dictators that were mainly interested in preserving their own position and a lesser interest in leading their country in a very, very difficult time. And both John and I have had the experience of being the bearer of bad news to the president. I think the worst chastisement I ever got was just a comment about sometimes the intelligence community has a very inelegant sense of timing. I do remember that one once. But I have to say as well that President Obama has insisted that we always tell it straight, that we be as objective as we possibly can, and to not color things, not politicize things, not shade things, don't tone them. Let him know what the truth is, and we've always tried to do that. Maybe sometimes not as well as we could have or should have, but that's certainly always been the objective. And I can certainly recall some unpleasant visits to the Oval, which I won't go into, but it's part of the deal. I think it's almost a writ in intelligence to always tell truth to power. It's something I had occasion to do with General Westmoreland when airstrikes didn't go so well, or where airstrikes missed the target. And he didn't like that, but that I learned early on. That's one of the, I think, fundamental obligations of a professional intelligence officer.
Jim is famous for saying that there are only two conditions in Washington. You might want to point that out.
Yes, you'd learn in the first week in Intel school there are only two conditions in life. There's policy success or Intel failure. No other conditions in life.
And as you point out, there's some of the PDBs and the analysis that in hindsight looks quite prescient in terms of what ultimately happens. But still, a lot of times policymakers are surprised, sometimes maybe without foundation, but a lot of times with good reason. And this PDB release covers the period of the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, which broke out on 6 October 1973. And on 5 October 1973, the PDB said that the military exercises underway in Egypt seem to be of a larger scale and are being conducted more realistically than previous ones, but they do not appear to be preparations for an offensive against Israel.
Just kidding, you know. Well, I think the serious point here that this quote raises is there's another old saw on intelligence about distinguishing between mysteries and secrets. And secrets are knowable facts that if you have the access, you can glean them. Whereas mysteries are unknowns. And I think oftentimes, and this may sound a little defensive, but I'll say it anyway, that I think too often the intelligence community is held to the same standard for divining both mysteries and secrets and being clairvoyant. Now, obviously, in this case, and there are many others where we didn't make the right call. But there are all for every one of those, there are probably 10 calls we made that were correct, which, of course, never get publicized, and where the intelligence community, I'm proud to say, have saved lives because of our ability to try to, our foresight, our anticipatory abilities, and it is accrued to the great benefit of the safety and security of this nation and its people. And I say that over a span of 53 or whatever years it's been that I've been in the intelligence business.
We just watched the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro. These PDBs also cover the period of time when we had the tragic attacks in Munich that led to the deaths of Israeli athletes, which had only brief treatment really in the PDBs here. Today, unfortunately, terrorism is much more a prominent feature, if not a constant feature of the landscape. And how do you see the PDB being the vehicle for making sure the president is kept up to date on what might be coming down the pike as far as terrorist threats is concerned?
We focus, obviously, a great deal of effort across the intelligence community and certainly in the CIA on terrorism and our efforts to counter it. This has, hugely complicated dimensions. It is what occasioned the change in our intelligence community. Manifested in the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, signed into law by President Bush in December of 2004, which created the position of DNI. And it also importantly represented the marriage, if you will, of both foreign and domestic intelligence. Something which, having grown up in the intelligence community, I had learned the firewall that always prevailed between foreign and domestic intelligence. And now we have to marry those two up as best we can. And we've been at the foreign intelligence business a lot longer. It's a lot more mature. I think we've made great progress, though, in linking our foreign intelligence capabilities with our responsibilities to support state, local, tribal, and private sector. So it actually imposes a perhaps greater burden on the PDB, given the time constraints the president has and the responsibility that's incumbent on us to be as succinct as we possibly can, keeping in mind the bigger picture, but also whatever insights we have on individual plots as they affect this country. Regrettably, the PDB articles on terrorism began to appear during this period, and I found it, frankly, chillingly haunting to read many of those articles which talked about the same forces that we are yet contending with. And also, regrettably, I think we're going to be in the business of suppressing terrorists for some time to come. And so that is, points out, highlights, emphasizes the importance of that being portrayed as accurately and completely as possible in the President's daily brief.
The coup that led to the ouster and death of President Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973 was also a very prominent event during this period of time. At that time, we had stark separation inside of CIA between analysts and operations officers, and the analysts who were writing PDBs at the time were really unaware of a lot of the covert action activities that we're taking on. As you know, right now we have an effort throughout the intelligence community, including at CIA, to better integrate our capabilities and so that our collectors and analysts and technologists and others are able to work together in a more effective and efficient fashion. Do you worry at all about analytic objectivity and integrity as a result of this process?
No, I don't at all. In fact, one of the features of the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act is a requirement that my office have an analytic integrity office whose complete full-time mission is to assess and monitor analytic integrity throughout the intelligence community. And we do that through a number of mechanisms, including surveys of analysts, which are anonymous. And so every year, thousands of analysts respond to these questionnaires about objectivity and whether or not they feel pressured. And importantly, an important question is whether they had an outlet, or did they achieve a satisfactory outcome when they sought help from management. With specific respect to what John has led, the transformation modernization in the Central Intelligence Agency, which basically calls for the amalgamation of analysts and collectors in the same organization into a series of 10 mission centers, which I strongly support, because only because it has had huge impact on strengthening the agency, but it has a tremendous spillover and influence effect on the rest of the intelligence community. My mantra during my 6 years as DNI has been integration. I believe that's why that's what the 9/11 Commission said was needed, and that found its way into the law, the IRTPA, was to promote more integration across the intelligence community. So the fact that analysts and collectors work together does not mean automatically that analytic integrity is in any way compromised. I would comment that what John has done at the headquarters of CIA is simply congruent with the way things operate in the field. Today, just about any embassy you go to, you'll have, of course, a CIA contingent, but representatives from many other components of the intelligence community are there. And they operate as an integrated team, capitalizing on the talents and capabilities and contributions of everyone who is, all IC components who are represented there. Always under the leadership of the chief of station, who wears a second hat for me as the DNI representative, which authenticates and reinforces the chief of station's role as the intelligence leader there to promote integration, and that's what's happening at CIA. Other components of the intelligence community are doing the same. DIA, NSA are in the throes of reorganizations and restructurings, the basic theme of which is greater integration. But to be clear, we do have a safeguard that required by the law to oversee analytic integrity. As well, each agency has an independent arm somewhere in its organization, those who produce intelligence products, who also watch for safeguarding analytic integrity.
One last question before we open it up to questions from the audience here. The PDB was a very unique product during the administrations of President Ford and Nixon. It remains a very unique product today. The CIA, and indeed the entire U.S. intelligence community, I believe, is the gold standard for the intelligence profession worldwide. And a lot of foreign intelligence services always seek to emulate what it is that the U.S. intelligence community is doing, how we do our work, how we collect, how we analyze, but also how we provide support to the head of state, head of government. We've had a number of conversations with our foreign counterparts. Can you talk a little bit about whether you see that any other countries or in general have similar types of products or service to their head of state that comes anywhere close to the PDB?
No, there is no other country on the planet that goes to the lengths that the United States does to keep its head of state as informed on world events as possible as we do. This is a very serious endeavor. It is 7 by 24. It takes the effort of a lot of people. now even more than is reflected in what's being rolled out here, because it involves the entire intelligence community. And in my view, it is a great strength of our system. Others have looked at it and I think made some effort to have some system for informing their head of state, but I know of no one that goes to the lengths that we do to serve our head of state, the President of the United States.
Okay, so let's open it up.
We are going to get right into questions, but I'm going to do one quick commercial. This is CIA Week here at the Nixon Library. Not only do we have these two great gentlemen on stage today, but tomorrow evening we have former intelligence briefer David Priest, who will talk his book, The President's Book of Secrets, and it chronicles the presidential daily briefs from Kennedy all the way to Obama. So please go online, nixonfoundation.org, and go ahead and sign up, and we'll hope to see you back here tomorrow night. For the first question, I'd like to ask it. Can you tell us about the presidential daily briefs with regards to President Nixon's trip to China, the impact and influence it had?
Well, actually, I can't say much about it because, as I say, it was I was a young pup at NSA at the time. I think the PDBs, though, in the run-up to that, and as well, it's my understanding that there were a lot of discussions about the trip outside just the PDB, because it was certainly a tremendously historic event, as we were reminded during our tour today, and of course it reset, to use a phrase, certainly the relationship with China, which legacy of which continues today. So I think the PDB treatment in the run-up served as a tutorial, if you will, but I also believe that the President Nixon was receiving inputs from other sources, principally National Security Advisor or Secretary of State, beyond what was in the PDB. John, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, as Jim said, I think it really was a seminal event that continues to resonate to this day. President Obama is leaving for China next Wednesday. He's going to be participating in the G20 event out there. But President Nixon's decision to go to China, which was so unexpected, and it also was a good example of how you can keep secrets before something takes place. But the Nixon to China reference now is part of our lexicon, something that will reference unexpected, and needing to have somebody who's taken such a strong line on an issue to really try to resolve the problems and overcome the obstacles. And unless we had that opening then, I think the course of events, human events, as well as international politics would have been much different. So President Nixon deserves a lot of credit for recognizing that China is a global presence, global power, and we needed to have that dialogue that sometimes can be a bit, tense, but also is a critically important one for our national security.
Our next question, back of the room to your right, gentlemen. This is the Area 5 commander for the American Legion, which is all of Southern California, Clay Baxter.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, gentlemen, for both your service to our country. One of the questions I have is what contribution to the presidential daily briefings that you get comes from the military?
Well, today, as I indicated, one of the major changes that is occasioned by the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act was the involvement of the entire intelligence community. So the arm for the military is my old agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, who will serve as a drafter, particularly on articles of, as you'd expect, on direct military reference. And DIA in turn can draw on the entirety of the military intelligence community, which includes the service intelligence arms as well as the intelligence arms serving the combatant command. So the military plays a prominent part of the process, and that's one of the benefits, I think, of opening it up, the preparation of the PDB to the entirety of the intelligence community.
And most of the intelligence community falls within the Department of Defense in terms of all the different agencies, National Security Agency, National Geospatial Agency, and others, and the intelligence services of the various services. So there's regular input from all of them, defense attaché reporting. Obviously, the United States military is actively engaged in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, and other areas, and so we get regular reports about that, and it's all fused within that, the PDB.
Again, back of the room to your right, gentlemen.
Hi, my question is, you mentioned that General Westmoreland sometimes seemed to get lost a little bit in the weeds and maybe didn't have as big a picture as he might have in Vietnam. And that influenced, of course, President Nixon's view. We also know that President Kennedy had hired Secretary of Defense McNamara from Ford Motor Company, who was very detail-oriented to streamline the military, et cetera. So my question is, do you think the combination of the two tended to more balance out Nixon's view, or did it compile the problem, or being too detail-oriented?
Well, that's probably a take-home question. I really can't say whether how much that influenced the president at the time. It did seem to me, and this is more of a contemporary observation, that we did get awfully deep into facts and stats, you know, body count, how many Viet Cong or North Vietnamese were killed, how many sorties were flown, how many bombs were dropped, and General Westmoreland was into that. That's just what he thought was important at the time. But I really can't say to what extent that preoccupation with detail and numbers and statistics had a bearing on the president. I guess it did, but I just can't answer that specifically.
A lot of times the details matter, and many times Jim and I find ourselves in the White House sit room and we're being pummeled with questions about the situation, and it's almost like, you know, stump the chump, and you know, we look back and forth at each other, who has the answer, and who takes it as a take-home answer.
Just like we're doing now.
But the intelligence community is the repository of those facts, the assessments, and policymakers who are trying to figure out and make sense of very confusing and complex situations really want to have as much input as possible, and they do look to the intelligence community to provide them that insight.
I do think it raises the issue, something John said, I'll just key on, that while intelligence is, we think, intelligence is quite important, and we try to tee it up for policymakers, they have the option of accepting it or rejecting it or buying into some of it or none of it, or drawing on other sources. That is their option. And so gauging to what extent a given piece of intelligence will influence a policymaker is kind of an imponderable, because they are probably, most of them are drawing on many sources for inputs into their decision calculus.
Did Patton focus on details? Did Patton focus on details?
Yes, he did. He was, yes, John.
Next question, front to your right.
Thank you very much for this event. This is a question for CIA Director Mr. Brennan. There were reports that the CIA had infiltrated Senate emails, specifically Dianne Feinstein's staff emails. I believe that you commented that such a thing would never occur or would have occurred. But there was also, I believe, a CIA Inspector General report that stated that such infiltration did occur. Can you please clarify this for us? Thank you.
I'm trying to understand the relationship between that and the PDB released today, quite frankly. I have talked about this, that we carried out our responsibilities. Those were CIA computers, and we had an obligation to make sure that they were secure. And when we found out that there were some vulnerabilities there, we carried out our responsibilities to investigate that and did it with fully informing the Senate about it. And so, believe it or not, there are some things that come out in the press that are not exactly a reflection of reality. And so I stand behind what CIA did during that period of time. And I have no problems in terms of explaining our work at that time, what we did, and to the Congress, and gave them a full report. So I can sleep comfortably, very comfortably at night related to that incident.
And I stand behind that.
Our next question, center section, just to your left, gentlemen.
My question is, how do you communicate with each other and members of the administration? Do you use emails? That's the first question. The second part of that, which I think is very relevant, when you send an email or you receive an email, do you know instinctively or in fact whether it is classified or not? And the last part of this is that if in fact you think it's important enough for national security and it's leaked either intentionally or by accident, do you think that will harm national security and therefore it is illegal?
Jim and I can communicate regularly in a number of ways. Phone calls, we spend a lot of time. Maybe it's his Vietnam days because he refers to us as foxhole buddies. We do communicate in different fashions. The U.S. government and intelligence community officials have different means of communication in terms of emails. There is unclassified emails that we send to one another of an unclassified nature. And then there are classified networks that the intelligence community really relies upon to do its work, to maintain its data, and to keep its secrets secret. Now, when information comes out in the public, a lot of times it's done with various purposes and agendas. If all of the various hacking that has taken place of individuals' emails, whether they be government emails or personal emails, I've had my personal emails hacked and personal emails put out publicly. This is one of the real challenges of our country, to be able to deal with the tremendous capabilities, unfortunately, of those who want to do us harm in that digital domain. So whenever Jim and I communicate, we try to make sure that we put on what's called the high side, classified information, and on the low side, unclassified information. And we all have an obligation to do that.
And one of the, well, my wife is not wild about it, but we do each have small secure facilities in our home, so we always have the ability to communicate securely, either at home or on the road or when we're mobile. And it's actually a very important capability. And I'm very, very proud of the trust and confidence that and the bond that John and I have, and the unique partnership, the unique bond between the CIA and my office.
Next question, very back of the room, center section.
Hi, you just spoke earlier about Defense Intelligence Agency, and what I want to know is what kind of a percentage, especially now that we're in the Middle East and the war on terror is going on, are you using their information 10% of your daily briefings, 30%, 50%?
To be quite honest, we don't really keep statistics like that. It's actually pretty hard to do that. So I wouldn't want to wager a guess on, you know, what percentage that we draw on any one of the IC components, because we use them all. What commonly occurs is we'll use several sources, which is, I think, the strength of our system today, to portray one story. So it isn't a question of this is an exclusively a CIA article, or this is exclusively a DIA article, or exclusively an NGA article. What we try to do is put them together. So we draw on the geospatial intelligence of NGA, their tremendous capabilities in graphics and use of imagery. We draw on attachés, for example, a component of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and we draw on the National Security Agency, of course, for signal intelligence, which we try to fuse together into one product. So we sort of don't try to do that anymore because it is kind of a statistically tough thing to do, and I'm not sure it has a lot of merit even if we did.
Our next question is going to come from the front row here.
Hi. Thank you very much for coming today. I happen to be part of the Nixon administration. I was wondering if you could just give us sort of an overview of how the PDB fits into the overall schedule for the day. President Nixon often got his around 6 or 6:30 at night, would tend to read it, and next morning meet with Kissinger. When I see film or press shots today, it looks like President Obama has a lot more people there every morning. How does it work for these presidents?
Well, nominally, of course, it varies a lot depending on the president's schedule, his travel schedule, and his commitments during the day. But the typical time for a PDB briefing is at 10 o'clock. What we call a PDB brief, but as I said, in his case, we don't go in and brief the articles in the PDB because he's already read them. So we use that time, which he and his advisors ascribe a lot of importance to either update the PDB from the time it was cut off, and that includes, I'm getting updated as I'm going to the White House to present the intelligence briefing. And then, of course, the White House has its own organic 7x24 watch function, the White House Situation Room, as well as the president's advisors, who are very competent themselves in intelligence issues, one of whom, of course, was John when he was in the White House. And so the president has attended to, I think, quite well, whether during the period of the briefing or throughout the day when there are breaking situations. John, you want to?
Yeah, a lot is dependent on the personality and the wishes of the individual president. I was the briefer for President Clinton when I was much more junior than I am today. And it was something that we started at 10 o'clock in the morning. I would go in there, and just like today, the first part of that Oval Office session would be the briefing. But I would bring the PDB in, the president would read it, and he'd ask questions, or I'd augment it with additional information. And then I would leave for the policy or the assistance of the president to talk about, okay, so what are we going to do about these intelligence issues and policy choices? Same thing happens today. Jim or someone else goes in, does the briefing, and then the president's advisors stay around. And when I was the assistant to the president, we would, take copious notes when Jim would be talking, and then we would, discuss with the president afterward what we need to do, what types of meetings we need to have, what types of phone calls we need to make overseas, what type of foreign leaders he should talk to. So that PDB really serves as the basis for subsequent actions and decisions and follow-on steps that either the president or others around him will be taking.
I think John makes a good point, if I could just foot stomp this, and that is many presidents, including this one, very rigorous about separating intelligence from the policy process. And so when we go in to brief the president, we're done, we leave before the policy deliberations. And I personally think that is the right formula.
We studiously avoid advocating for policy courses, because if we were to do that, I think it really would call into question the integrity of our analysis and our assessments, because we could be tailoring things in support of a certain policy course. And so we tee these things up, whether it be in the PDB oval session or in the White House Situation Room.
Next question from the back of the room.
Afternoon, gentlemen. I just had a question. After giving intelligence briefings myself in Iraq, we've had some inaccuracies. I was curious, when you gave your briefing, did you discover later that, that wasn't too accurate, or had to go back in the room and kind of eat some crow?
Jim has, I haven't.
Yeah, absolutely. We never represent that, we're 100% right all the time. We're not. And I've made errors in the course of my oral briefings in the in the Oval Office, and I was quick to correct them. Because I just think that's important from a credibility standpoint. And sometimes you don't have the complete facts, or the facts you were given turned out not to be accurate. There's lots of reasons that can happen. But you're doing this on a fairly tight time schedule, and you're trying your best to make sure that you are complete and accurate. Errors are going to occur. But we're always, I think, conscientious about making sure that we've corrected them.
Next question is from Yorba Linda Councilmember Gene Hernandez.
Well, first, thank you, gentlemen, for coming to Yorba Linda. We certainly appreciate you being here and taking time from your busy schedules. Knowing Yorba Linda politics, I'll throw this out to you. I'm sure you're in a very political situation, and I appreciate the comment, Mr. Brennan, that you try to stay absolutely neutral. But I'm convinced somewhere along the line, some staffer is going to try to get to you and say, well, hey, you probably don't want to brief the president on that, or just downplay that. If that type of thing occurs, do you just say, well, thanks, but no thanks? Or do you just kind of go ahead and give the briefing you're going to give and let the chips fall where they will?
Well, I'm pleased to say that doesn't happen. I can't think of a case where someone said, for a substantive reason, boy, don't brief that, or that's bad news, or no. I don't recall an occasion for that. I think that, again, that's almost a holy writ for the profession of intelligence, is telling truth to power, no matter how unwelcome or that truth may be.
I've never had anybody tell me not to do that, but I've been a participant in some very animated and tense discussions, both as an intelligence briefer as well as an assistant to the president, where there are questions about the assessment or the intelligence, and maybe sometimes either the rigor or whatever else. Those debates and discussions and even arguments, I think, are very healthy, because whether or not you're an assistant to the president or you're the DNI or the director of CIA, you want to make sure that the president gets the best intelligence possible. And so sometimes those discussions that take place before something is brought to the president really help to refine and to make the product or the briefing better once it does get to the president.
Next question to your left, back of the room.
Hi, thank you so much for coming here today and taking time out of your busy schedules to be here at the Nixon Presidential Library. Very pleased to have you here. I've been able to speak with Admiral Rogers previously, the head of the NSA and the person who's in charge of the cyber defense of the United States of America. And he often talks about the idea of a cyber Pearl Harbor and how we need to pay attention to that, as well as the kinetic issues that confront us as well. This past week, we had what appears to be the cyber Pearl Harbor, in which we had the NSA hacked, and all of its, apparently according to the leakers, the information that shows everyone on the web how to get into the backdoor of the NSA, or the tools with which the NSA uses to find out information about our enemies and or our friends. How big an issue is this? How monumental a hack is this? And if you're giving the president a daily briefing, to what extent do you cover this issue?
Well, this is a very bothersome development. I don't know that I would go so far as to call it a cyber Pearl Harbor. Others before Admiral Rogers have spoken to this possibility. Leon Panetta, former Secretary of Defense, former CIA Director, Mike McConnell, former DNI, have all spoken about the notion of a cyber Pearl Harbor. When I think of a cyber Pearl Harbor, I think of a massive cyber attack on the country that would affect our infrastructure, our financial sector, our electrical system. This is what, at least in my mind, comes up as a so-called cyber Pearl Harbor. The case that you bring up is a serious one. We are still sorting this out, but I think Chris Inglis, former distinguished Deputy Director of NSA, probably said it best when he said, well, we have to march on here and recover from this. As well, given the, I will say that given the contemporary period of these tools that were leaked, which is in late 2013, as a result of presidential group that was assembled after the Snowden revelations, we have I think, a better process for making decisions about forewarning, informing providers of a deficiency that's potentially exploitable versus the national security implications of doing that. And that's a very difficult process, but that has changed since the contemporary, the time in question that's at least indicated in that hack. And it's still under investigation. We don't know exactly the full extent of or understanding of exactly what happened. And to answer your question, yes, the president is certainly made aware of those kinds of happenings.
The larger issue, though, in terms of the vulnerability of this country to these types of cyber, whether it be attacks or exploitation or manipulation or collection, I think is probably the most serious issue that we face as a country looking forward, because this cyber environment, this digital domain, is the new domain that most human interaction takes place in. And I don't think we as a country yet have come to terms with what is the appropriate role of government in what is mainly a private sector owned and operated environment, and how are we going to ensure that we can safeguard the security and prosperity of this nation when things are happening in that environment that the government does not even have, I guess, the authority at this point to do certain things in order to protect our critical infrastructure, our privacy, our civil liberties. And so there have been a number of issues over the last year in terms of what is the role of government and how can technology help or hurt the government's ability to take care of what is its primary responsibility, which is to safeguard the safety and security of the American people. And so this administration, the intelligence community, is focused like a laser on this, and I would say that the next administration really needs to take this up early on as probably the most important issue that they have to grapple with.
Gentleman on the right wall.
I'd also like to thank you for being here today. This has been fascinating. My question is similar to what you were just discussing. I've often heard that cyber terrorism is our biggest threat of the future in how it can affect our infrastructure and financial sectors. Would you agree with that it's actually our biggest terrorism threat?
Well, I'm always reluctant to grade threats. Which one is the most serious, and prioritize them. And the reason for that is we don't get a pass on any of them. And the scenario you suggest is a scary one, and I think I could probably conjure up lots of other scary scenarios, particularly in the biological warfare realm, that are also pretty scary. And so we have to attempt to maintain vigilance and anticipate and warn of any of these scary such scenarios. So that is certainly a bad one, and that's kind of fits the definition to a certain extent of what was previously referred to as a quote cyber Pearl Harbor. And I completely agree with what John said about the whole nature of cyber, which the classic technology of having a two-edged sword. Our lives, both personal and professional, completely dependent on it, but at the same time, it poses a huge threat to our society and our way of life. And one of the ways specific ways that threat could manifest itself is exactly along the lines you suggest.
As we continue to move toward having the Internet of Things, where everything basically is going to be connected to that digital environment, there is a national dependence on the vitality, the reliability, the security of that environment. And I wasn't meaning to imply that I'm just concerned about how terrorists can exploit it. There are other uses of it that are potentially harmful to this country. As you point out, our financial systems, the electric power grids, transportation systems, our hospitals and our medical centers all rely on having that reliable connectivity in that cyber domain. And so what I'm saying is that as we now are experiencing more and more the technological revolution of the 21st century, a lot of our laws and practices and processes, which were designed and formulated and developed in the 20th century, have really not kept up to it. And cyber is something unlike anything else. We know the responsibility of the police on the streets in terms of keeping the streets of Yorba Linda safe and secure. We know what the responsibility of the government is on our ports and maritime domain as well as aviation. We have not yet figured out, and we don't have a national consensus about what the role of government is there to optimize privacy and civil liberties while at the same time optimizing our security, so that whether it be nation states, our adversaries, or terrorist groups, or individuals who just want to see what type of destructive capability they can have because they want to hack into something and destroy it. This is something that I think we as a nation really need to understand, that potential vulnerability, unless we take the steps necessary. I think it's going to require a very unique and unprecedented partnership between the government, the public sector, and the private sector. And I do believe that maybe a national commission needs to be established so that we can take a look at what we need to do as a country. And cyber doesn't respect sovereign boundaries either, so it's not just something that we can do alone. But I do think that this is the issue that we're going to have to deal with in the future, aside from all the other ones, terrorism and proliferation and you name it.
Right here in the front row.
Thank you for your service. My question is, who ultimately decides what's going to be in the daily briefing? And second, when the president reviews the daily briefing and he's looking at a particular piece of intelligence, does he know that that intelligence comes from the CIA or the DIA or some other intelligence agency? And does the president need to have someone personally brief him on the daily briefings, or is his prerogative to just read them without having anyone present?
First of all, he does know the sources of every article. Who the drafter or drafters were, oftentimes will have more than one component who will team to write an article, and then where it was drawn on, what other components. So that is reflected at the bottom of every article. The process for selecting articles is kind of a collective one. We have a dedicated staff of people who do this on a 7 by 24 hour basis. We have very seasoned senior executive professionals who make these decisions, which gets a very, very light touch from me. I try to stay out of it and don't get involved day to day, and we always are very careful about the people that we pick to manage this this activity. And your other question was? Does the president have to have an actual person briefing them? Well, in this case, I know President Bush did have his process was to read the PDB and have someone there with him to discuss it, ask questions. That's not the process that President Obama uses. He reads it, and we know he does because of comments and questions he has about it. And then when we are in the Oval with him, we either, he may ask a question or give us a task from a PDB article that he has read, and or we will complement or supplement what was in the PDB with maybe updates, since there is a production process, so you have to cut it off at a certain time, or other items that perhaps don't make the threshold, but which we think he should know about. And there are, as I indicated earlier, there are others who participate in this. This is not we're not the exclusive source of intelligence for the president, which is a good thing. This is a crucial role that John played when he was in the White House, and it was great because of his long distinguished service in the intelligence community, and he played a very important role in supporting the president. I think the important thing here is that this is clearly a team sport. There is the engine represented by the intelligence community to turn this out day after day after day, but it's not to say that that is the exclusive source of input for the president.
Just a word about how PDB articles are initiated. Frequently, they will be generated by those experts, those analysts who are watching a situation develop, and they believe that the president needs to be updated on something. But also, Jim may see an issue and say, we really need a PDB on this. I do the same thing. I tell our folks we really need to make sure the president is aware of these changing dynamics, as well as the PDB recipients themselves. The president, vice president, or the national security advisor will say, we really need to make sure that the president is updated on it. A lot of times, PDB articles are drafted to coincide with the president's meetings or travel. As I said, he's going out to China next week. So what we try to do also is to make sure that he is as fully informed as possible as he goes into these engagements.
Another feature that we didn't mention earlier was what we call expert briefs, or formerly known as deep dives. But the process is to bring in a pair of experts from across the community to brief the president on a particular topic. Often when a visitor is coming to Washington, or he's going to go on a trip, or some other issue that we think he needs to be up to speed on. So we'll bring in the experts, and we have some wonderful talent across the IC to do that. And the president invariably engages with them. So I think the bottom line is that this is a team effort, and we try to use many different methods for conveying the intelligence.
Next in the front row to your left, gentlemen.
Thanks for being here today, Director Brennan and Clapper. My question is piggybacking on the previous cyber threat questions. Is there any backstop in the plans, or even an elevated concern for private companies that are facing an advanced persistent threat from these government state nations? Can you speak to that?
Well, if you mean, do we try to warn them, the answer is absolutely yes. And the Department of Homeland Security has a very important role here in engaging with the private sector. So as we learn of, if we do learn of potential for an attack, in whatever form it may take, and of course the first challenge then is, if you can, is attribution. Is this from a foreign source, or is it from a domestic source? And then what is it we can share on a timely basis without compromising sources and methods? And then there is a mechanism for warning industry and in fact the entire commercial sector of a potential threat.
DHS, FBI, NSA, CIA have a very close collaborative relationship in terms of making sure that we're sharing information with each other, putting the pieces together, and as the threats emerge, and if U.S. private sector companies are under threat, the appropriate offices will be in touch with them.
All right, our next question is back row here, to your left, gentlemen.
Yes, you mentioned earlier about getting the intentions of the Egyptian army completely wrong. I was wondering if you could give us some examples or anecdotes from the other side of the coin where you feel that the presidential daily briefing was particularly on point and actionable.
Well, I think there are any number of plots, which are terrorist plots, which we get onto, get some insight into. I can't and won't stipulate specific examples or how we knew about them, but there have been many of those that have been thwarted because of the work of the intelligence community writ large, which I count as a success. You don't get credit for something that didn't happen, but that's That's often the case. I think where we also do very well is in when the president has foreign engagements and in preparing him for what the issues are, what's on the mind of his foreign counterpart, that sort of thing. Again, don't want to go into specifics here, but I think those are two examples I would cite of where I think it has worked on the other side of the coin. John?
And most of our successes are still secrets, because we may have intelligence that a country is going to do something, and we get that insight in advance. We tell the president will take action, or there are certain types of things that we can do to stop somebody or something from happening. And those are the successes, when something does not go off the rails, whether it be a terrorist attack or invasion. And it's that insight in advance of those situations that really the president is looking for, that advantage, that decision advantage. And we know of many instances over the course of this administration where we're able to bring something, not just to the president, but a lot of other people at the senior-most levels of the government, as well as departments and agencies, that allowed them to stop a proliferator from acquiring a certain type of technology, or frustrating some efforts on the part of terrorist groups to move finances or operatives or materiel. These are the things that we do on a regular basis. Unfortunately, sometimes things get through and we don't have the same type of 100% success rate on all these issues, but I can say that I'm quite proud of what the intelligence community and CIA have done to help keep this country safe.
Our next question is actually coming from us, to us live from the internet. It's from Twitter.
Have we achieved, this is from Kyle Simpson, have we achieved coordination and intel sharing capability from agency to agency and from domestic to foreign governments to avoid intelligence stovepipes and blind spots?
Well, I think it's a great question, and I think it's a journey. It's not something that we'll be all through with by close of business next Friday. It's the reason why the position I occupy was established. In my dotage, now after 50 years in this, I can unequivocally say that when I think back 50 years ago, and the way intelligence was, where CIA and NSA might as well have been on two different planets. And it is a much different situation now. This is, I think, an acknowledgement of some hard-won lessons, not the least of which, of course, was 9/11. And I think there's a commitment and a dedication throughout the community that to work as a team and to share and collaborate and integrate. That's not to say we don't have issues, we do. You mentioned with foreign partners, I don't know of a time, certainly in my professional lifetime, where we share as much with foreign partners as we do today. Now, there's an obvious reason for that, is being impelled by the specter of the terrorist threat that we share with many other countries. So that, in turn, has induced or stimulated a great deal of sharing. What we do work at, though, because that is largely on a bilateral basis. Many countries are pleased to share with us and do willingly and freely. So what we try to promote, though, is sharing between and among other countries. And this is particularly true in Europe, given the challenges they have. And they have certain obstacles, both legal and others, that prevent free sharing as much as they might like. So I do think we've come a long way since 9/11, but that's not to say that there's not more that we can do.
And we have come light years, but I think a lot of people who complain about, well, if they'd only share more information with one another, really do not have any idea of the complexity of putting together a national and international architecture where you're going to connect many different departments and agencies, many different IT systems, many different authorities and responsibilities, and be able to move the information and tap into and pulse data sets that are out there so that you can move information and inform people at the speed of light. And something can happen, or we get intelligence in a different part of the world that will have importance as far as the streets of Yorba Linda. How do you move that information very quickly, protecting sources and methods, and move it through the system? You have national government, you have state, you have local, the cop in the street. And I think Americans would be very, very impressed by what this country has done. What Americans like you, who work in the different public sector areas, are working around the clock to try to make sure that the bit of data that comes in, and we're being overwhelmed with data, not just that which is collected clandestinely or secretly, but that also which is available in open source and social media. How do you make sense of that, and how do you interact with one another? And putting together that system, I think, has really been a challenge. But and I will give Jim Clapper additional credit here for his orchestration of the intelligence community, making sure that we all interact with each other as optimally as we can. But there really is an engineering issue here, that you want to make sure that you're able to interact with each other as effectively and efficiently as possible.
We have time for 2 more questions, but before we get to the second to last question, I want to remind you all that we have David Priest here tomorrow night, 7 p.m. It's free. I encourage you to attend. It'll be interesting. Our second to last question.
Hi there. I'm wondering if there's a difference between the briefings provided to a presidential nominee, president-elect, and then finally the sitting president. Thank you.
Well, not a great deal of difference. We're, of course, in the throes of that right now. This year, with more media attention and controversy than ever since we started this in 1952. So the briefings for the candidates are probably a bit more general, more topically focused, and do not go into operational considerations or covert action or any of those kinds of sensitive issues. After the election, and when the president-elect is known, then it's pretty much a parallel, so that the oncoming president is essentially getting, for the most part, the same as the incumbent president. I think this is a great strength of this country, that we do this. And of course, the intelligence community, as always, attempts to do this in as apolitical a fashion as possible. But the objective is to do our part to ensure as smooth a transition and as smooth a handoff as possible.
One last question before we turn the microphone back over to Joe Lambert in closing.
Hi, I was just curious how many man-hours it takes to develop the presidential daily briefs?
That's a great question, and the fact is I really don't know, because it is situational and article dependent. Many times articles take a great deal of research. We'll occasionally do what we call stand-back features, which are longer, take more research. Sometimes the coordination process can be a little painful. If we have dissents, we have to accommodate those. So it's, we don't really keep track of how much time it takes. And it's not a profit-making thing, unfortunately. So there's not the need to. I think our commitment is to whatever it takes to make these products, these articles, with as high quality as possible, and we'll expend whatever effort it takes.
I think our wives would say it would take fewer women hours than man hours, because women are much more efficient. But what I would say is that you can have world-class experts who are going to put together a PDB, and maybe it might take them 6 hours to draft something. It'll take them additional time to work it through the system. But the 6 hours of drafting are really the reflection of many, many years of investment in understanding the issues. And that expertise really comes with a tremendous amount of effort. So what we try to give the president is the accumulation of that knowledge, that capability, so that he gains the fruits of that effort. So looking at the actual drafting and coordination, that's just a small part of the investment of time that goes into producing quality products.
Please join me in thanking Director Brennan, Director Clapper,